question for you. Do you think that it is your flexibility or your general resourcefulness that will allow you to assimilate language patterns even more fully as you continually experience and practice them? Is it both? Okay. Oh, good, good. Excellent. So, did you have fun playing with the presuppositions?
Yeah.
Great. Did you notice that some of them just went really easily and naturally, and others of them were a bit more of a stretch? Notice that? And so that shows, where there's a potential for increasing your flexibility even more. Now, I'd like to ask you, what were some of the things that you learned from the exercise? How was it for you? What was helpful for you in coming up with presuppositions? Any questions you have?
The hardest one was with the negation at the end, the double negation.
Mm-hmm.
The rest is
Okay, so the hardest one for you had the double negation at the end. Anybody know right off which one that is?
Yes.
I think that probably works best with
Says,
more of a,
weren't you the spelling champion in fourth grade? Is that
21.
21?
Is that the one you're thinking of?
it's like stacking convinces, isn't it?
Or the counterfactual conditions? That was tough for me.
So what's an example on that one? I don't pay any attention whatsoever to the labels.
If you hadn't
So-
been able to learn, you wouldn't be able to drive a car.
Oh, right, right. Oh, okay, right.
This one, yeah.
So now, in what situation, with what group of people, would you imagine that a sentence like that might be really effective?
When you're trying to motivate someone who doesn't have much self-confidence.
Okay, could be something like that.
If they have a lot of resources already, but they're maybe aren't recognized.
They may have resources they're not recognizing. Now, another thing, just a general statement I'll make, is that the ones that include one or more negations can be more useful for people who are polarity responders as well.
Right.
So that way there's a negation, and so then to do their polarity response, they're doing a double negation, and then it tends to kind of overwhelm the whole polarity response process. So those are good ones to practice up on and get familiar with. And there's a kind of a special case where I find that they're most useful. Now, in addition, though, even for those of us who are not polarity responders, they tend to be a little bit of a trance inducer, aren't they? It takes a minute on the receiving end for me to kind of sort it out and come up with what does it really mean and what's my answer to the question. So in that sense as well, it can be useful for anyone. And because it is convoluted, those kinds of sentences are likely to become more and more fluent with more practice than the ones that are less convoluted. Does that make sense? So the more kind of layers and negations and et cetera, for me anyway, the more practice it takes to make them easier. Speaking of practice, this is one of those exercises that I encourage everyone to do again and again and again. This is an exercise that can never be completed because there's always another outcome out there that you can presuppose. And there's always a little bit more creative spin you can bring to these various presuppositional forms. And so something that I have done at various times in the past and continually do as well, sometimes just recently I did this, I will take a situation I'm going into, for example, a client situation, and I'll think of a useful message that I would like to presuppose for this client. And I will take this message and I will go through and presuppose it with all the forms. Now, when I actually go in to work with a client, I'm not trying to remember all of those. It's just kind of a warm-up for my brain, so in order to allow it to be more easy and natural for the useful presuppositions to just roll off my tongue. When my husband first learned NLP, he learned it for the context of negotiation. He was negotiating on behalf of his industry. He was in the wood stove industry. And at that time, various governments were starting to crack down on air pollution. And the simplest way to do that, since it's an itty-bitty industry, the simplest way is just to ban wood stoves. However, at the same time, the industry was developing cleaner burning technologies so that the newer stoves really were not the problem that the older stoves were. So Kevin would go into situations with government officials and people from the gas company who obviously don't want to have wood stoves around, and et cetera, all these other people. And basically, he was the only one around the table who wanted the wood stove industry to continue. So he was in a tough situation. One of the things that he did was, when he was going into a negotiation, he would take an outcome that he had and presuppose it with all the forms, forget about it, and then just go in and be in the moment and pay attention to what was happening without thinking about the presuppositions as he's in the situation, but with his mind kind of warmed up to come up with useful presuppositions. And incidentally, wood stoves are not banned in the state of Colorado, and clean burning technology has really taken off. In fact, it's hard to buy a wood stove that does not have clean burning technology anymore. So that is the end result of those negotiations.
That's really interesting, Tamara, because we found that in our dialogue,
It was such a wonderful way to be affirmed, and such a wonderful way of strengthening your outcome with the topics that we've chosen. It was really amazing.
Great. So you felt affirmed with your outcomes through having somebody presuppose them for you. Excellent. Okay.
So I think,
Yes.
Tamara, that you need to know your client
Mhm.
before you put all these presuppositions. Because the more we know the background of each one of us, it's easier to.
Yes. The more background we know about a client, the easier it is to prepare ahead of time for them. And so one thing that I would often do is if somebody was coming in to see me, if I knew what they were coming in for, then that would give me a little bit more specific information. If I didn't know what they were coming in for, then I would think of some outcome that is generally useful for people, like having self-confidence with things that you can do, something like that. And I would practice presupposing that outcome. Even if it didn't apply to this client, that's okay. I've warmed up my mind to use the presuppositional forms one way or the other. So, and certainly the more information you have, the more you can be specific in a way that will be targeted for that particular person. Okay, so a couple things for this evening. You'll notice that over here on this wall in the corner have appeared some flip chart pages. And these are various contexts in which you may want to be applying your language pattern skills. So, to make it even more applicable for you personally and the individual situations that you are in, what I would like for you to do is to go ahead and put up on those flip charts examples of limiting beliefs that either you have or that you run into in others in those contexts where you want to use the material. So I went ahead and put a few up just to prime the pump. When you do put them up, just check them ahead of time that they fit the form of either A equals B or A causes B. So, what was that?
They have to be.
We want them to be either a cause effect or complex equivalence. Because tomorrow morning, we are going to go back to the sleight of mouth material, which applies directly to those kinds of beliefs in those forms. The more you have some examples in mind ahead of time, the easier it will be to get a lot out of each exercise, because you'll be ready to dive in rather than spending your time thinking of beliefs. So be able to just dive in and use a lot of examples, get a lot more experience, and get the patterns into your body even better. Haven't you? So, thank you for all of your, one more thing I wanted to suggest. This evening, think of something nonverbal to do. Take a walk, sit in the hot tub, whatever it might be. Think of something that is a break for your brain. Be kind to your brain is my recommendation. Thank you so much for your attention. And I commented to some of the coaches that in my perception, you guys are doing fantastic, especially for this late in the training. I find you to be a very clear-headed bunch. So I'm pleased to see that. And at the same time, feel free to let go of the information at the end of the day and approach it fresh in the morning, allowing your unconscious to continue learning and exploring these things in the meantime. Okay, any announcements?